It all started when the HOA decided they had to send a message, a warning that would make me fall in line with their unreasonable demands. Instead of using official notices or even sending a representative to talk, they went down a darker path, one meant to scare me and my family into submission. One evening, there was a sudden, aggressive knock at my front door, the kind that makes your heart skip a beat. When I opened it, I was met by two men dressed like law enforcement officers, uniforms pressed and badges hanging around their necks, but something about them didn't feel right. Their stance was too stiff, their words too rehearsed, and the way they avoided eye contact gave them away. They claimed to be responding to violations on behalf of the HOA, speaking in tones that tried to carry authority, but their act was full of cracks. It was clear they weren't real police officers, but imposters playing a role, and their entire presence was meant to intimidate. The HOA had escalated their harassment into something that crossed a line, believing they could scare us into silence with fake authority figures showing up uninvited at our homes. I stood there at the door. Something about their behavior kept gnawing at me. Real law enforcement officers usually carry themselves with confidence and a calm presence. But these men looked uneasy, shifting their weight from one foot to the other, as if they were unsure of their own story. Their questions were strange, too, circling back to petty HOA issues like fence height and lawn care. Things no real officer would ever bother with. They kept glancing at each other, waiting for cues before speaking, and their voices carried a nervous edge that only made the situation feel more off. I noticed how their so-called badges didn't catch the light the way official ones do, and their uniforms seemed just slightly mismatched, like they had been thrown together from pieces of a costume rather than issued by any real department. My instincts screamed that this was a setup, an intimidation tactic designed to pressure me into compliance. Instead of bringing clarity, their presence only raised suspicion, and the more they spoke, the more obvious it became that they weren't who they claimed to be. Their act was sloppy, their lies too thin, and their authority nothing more than a masked jest when their charade seemed like it might drag on. My wife stepped into the doorway, her calm yet commanding presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. She didn't raise her voice or even look rattled, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that made the so-called officers hesitate. She listened quietly for a moment, letting them ramble on about HOA violations and supposed legal consequences, but it was clear she wasn't buying a single word. With years of experience dealing with real authority, she could read people in an instant, and everything about their performance screamed fraud. She stood with her arms crossed, unshaken by their attempts to pressure us. And the way she leaned slightly forward made it clear she was about to take control of the situation. The imposters, sensing her strength, started to stutter, their words losing the false confidence they had tried so hard to project. They weren't prepared for someone who wouldn't be intimidated, someone who could cut right through their lies. In that moment, the balance of power shifted completely, and my wife was ready to show them that their little act had reached its breaking point without hesitation. She reached into her bag and pulled out her badge, the polished emblem of a U.S. Marshal catching the light in a way that instantly silenced the room. There was no mistaking its authenticity, no way to question the authority it represented, and, for the first time since they arrived, the imposters were the ones standing frozen in place. My wife held it up firmly, her expression unwavering as she introduced herself with the confidence that only comes from years of real service. The shift in energy was immediate, like a curtain had been ripped away to expose their performance for what it truly was. Their fake badges suddenly looked like toys compared to the weight of hers, their staged authority crumbling against the reality of federal power standing right in front of them. She didn't need to raise her voice or make threats. The badge itself carried all the force necessary to dismantle their scheme. The longer they stared at it, the more their nerves betrayed them, their once practiced routine unraveling into stammers and uneasy glances. What was meant to be an intimidation tactic had turned into a dangerous mistake. And now they were trapped in a confrontation they never expected the moment the badge came into view. Everything about their act fell apart. The confidence they had tried so hard to project evaporated instantly, replaced by wide eyes and trembling hands that betrayed the fear they were desperately trying to hide. One of them took a small step back, as if instinctively wanting to run, while the other's voice cracked as he tried to mumble some excuse that made no sense. Their fake authority meant nothing now, exposed in the most humiliating way possible. And every second they stood there only deepened their panic. They glanced at each other frantically, silently begging for a way out, but there was none. My wife's calm, unshakable stance only made it worse for them, because they knew they weren't just pretending in front of an ordinary homeowner anymore. They were caught red-handed by someone who could put them in real legal trouble. The silence between their stammered words grew heavier, the weight of their failed intimidation pressing down on them. What was supposed to scare us into submission had turned into a nightmare of their own making, and the fear in their eyes made it clear they were looking for the fastest way to escape within seconds. The false bravado that had brought them to my doorstep dissolved into sheer desperation as they realized they had no ground to stand on. One of them muttered something under his breath before both began backing away, their steps quickening until they were practically stumbling over each other in their rush to get off my porch. The sound of their retreat echoed through the quiet neighborhood, a frantic shuffle of footsteps that drew curious eyes from nearby windows. Neighbors who had been watching from a distance now had no doubt that the so-called officers weren't who they claimed to be, and whispers began spreading almost instantly. The sight of men dressed as police, running like guilty criminals, became the HOA's greatest embarrassment yet. My wife didn't chase after them or even raise her voice. She simply stood firm at the door, her badge still visible, a silent reminder of the mistake they had made. What was meant to frighten us into compliance had instead exposed the HOA's willingness to cross dangerous lines. And now their attempt at intimidation had backfired in the most public way possible, leaving them scrambling to recover from a humiliation that couldn't be hidden.